Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, I'm Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. What is the definition of sales? There are probably a lot of definitions, but back in the year 2003, I ran into Brian Tracy. Now, Brian is a motivational speaker, and he is an author of over 70 books, and he was making one of his visits to New Zealand. I loved Brian's work, and I got to know him personally. One of the things I really liked was his definition of sales, and went like this. Sales is a transfer of enthusiasm from one person to another. A transfer of enthusiasm. Wow. I always thought of sales as something slimy or grimy, something that you were forced to do in order to get your product or service in front of a client. But with this definition, Brian changed the way that I looked at sales. What he couldn't have known is that he didn't just change my perception of sales. He changed my entire perception of communication. If selling could be enhanced through enthusiasm, then so could writing. Instead of just putting words on paper, an article could come alive with enthusiasm. There's just one problem, isn't there? How do you write enthusiastically? Are there stages or steps to follow? Not surprisingly, the stages aren't something you're unfamiliar with. The steps to enthusiastic writing are seemingly so obvious that you can miss them. And yes, writing can get very grimy without the power of enthusiasm. It's time to find out what can make your words sing. So let's take a look at the 3 steps that you're going to need to put that zing back in your words. The first thing is you're going to need an outline, and the outline needs to be fresh. The second thing is you're going to need to feel very strongly about the issue right now. And the third is you need to be able to deviate from your script a bit and make it messy. Let's start with the first thing, which is how to write enthusiastically, but this is about the fresh outline. A couple of years ago, my mother-in-law came to stay with us for a while, and that was the week I had to throw out all my spices. Most people think that cooking is an act of getting ingredients together in a pot or vessel, but we also know that the ingredients matter. The fresher the ingredients, the tastier the food. What we seem to forget are the spices. Like many others, I'd bought bottles of spices and they sat in the pantry for weeks, even months on end. My mother-in-law was appalled at the lack of freshness. Those spices were completely hopeless, so she got me to throw the whole lot and to start afresh. An outline is a lot like stale spices. Whether you're outlining a big project like a book or a relatively smaller project like an article, you're still dealing with the factor of freshness. If the outline is a week old, it's already getting relatively stale. If it's older, you're likely to be struggling to find out what you outlined in the first place. The reason I outline is because it saves me time. I'm not exactly the kind of person who loves to outline. The reason why I do so is because I know that gives me structure, and it saves me an enormous amount of time. Even so, there is this curse called excessive outlining. In my desire to create a truckload of content, I'll head to the cafe and then I'll outline 5 or 6 or 7, maybe 10 articles. Let's say I took some of those outlines and then I wrote the articles in a week or 2 weeks, then I'd be fine. But as you can tell, it's practically impossible to write so many articles in such a short span of time. Which means that the articles start to get stale. I get newer ideas along the way, and then I add to this mountain of outlines. And the longer I wait, the more the earlier outlines seem to fade into oblivion. I'll look at the outlines, and I know that they're important, but they're not fresh anymore. Like those spices in my kitchen cabinet, I can throw them in the dish, but they won't enhance the dish at all. Which is why you need to get an idea, outline it, and then get started with your writing. I've tried this. I've tried to re-outline it. My clients have tried to do it, and it's very frustrating. It seems to take twice or thrice the amount of work just to get that outline firing on all cylinders. And even then, it's a pretty pathetic attempt at just resuscitating that outline. The longer you wait, the more that freshness seems to just disappear. And that battle takes a lot of energy, which means that you're less likely to write with any sort of enthusiasm. For the most part, outlines don't vary too much in their structure. An outline will follow a pretty straightforward construction. So you'll have this kind of structure. You'll have the first 50 words, which is the opening of the article. Then you'll have a what is this thing about? Why is it important? How do we go about it? You have other questions, you have objections, you have examples, and you have the end of the article. So that's kind of the structure that you have for most outlines. So if you had an article on how to buy earphones, then you have the first 50 words, your opening of the article, how to avoid being taken in by earphone marketing and choose the right one. What else is there to consider when you're buying it? Then you have objections, you have examples, and the end of the article. Now, that article isn't going to change a lot 6 months or even 6 years from now, is it? You can still write a great article or a chapter in a book about it. It makes no sense to say that 6 years from now, you will shy from writing the article. But this is where the weirdness kicks in. Intellectually, you know that you can write the article, but when it comes down to writing it, the fact that you wrote the outline a while ago will prevent you from getting too far ahead. You'll somehow want to write another article, any article, just to avoid the one that is stale. This is funny, isn't it? You're going through so much of avoidance tactics, and of course it's going to be hard to be enthusiastic. You can tell when someone is enthusiastic. You can see it in their writing, in their cooking, in their dancing, in their whatever they do. You can feel that enthusiasm. And that's what you feel in writing too. You're using the same recipe, you're using similar ingredients, you're using the same method, but somehow that dish doesn't reach its standards. That writing doesn't reach the standards that you're looking for. Fresh outlines are like fresh spices. You shouldn't wait too long. You need to outline and write as quickly as you possibly can. I've given you this advice before on previous podcasts, but, well, it's good advice, so here we go again. Here's how I go about writing. I will outline on one day, and by the next day, I am already writing. I'm already creating that basis for the article. But why not write on the day itself? You could, of course, but more often than not, it's better to keep a bit of space between the outline and the material you're about to write. And this is because the outline allows your brain to let your thoughts percolate. A day later, your article is likely to be far superior because you've been thinking about the contents. You'll read something and the idea will get into that article. I listen to a podcast, I listen to an audiobook, I have a conversation, and all of that percolates into my storyline. And so it starts to build up, and that's why you don't want to do everything on the same day. Now, an outline is crucial. It's crucial to get that enthusiasm in your writing, but it's not enough. So what we've looked at is this enthusiasm factor, but the second really important thing is to feel strongly about the issue right now. And this takes us to the second part. What does feeling strongly about the issue right now mean? How do we use that in our writing to create this enormous amount of enthusiasm? On a very sad day of my life, I learned a very important lesson. My friend Cher Reynolds taught me that lesson. It was the day of my father-in-law's funeral. When someone close to you dies, most people are very uncomfortable. They know that you're grieving, they know that you're in pain, and it's at this point when they make the same statement. It's a very uncomfortable statement. They say something like, "If you need something, please let me know." But Cher did something entirely different. She baked a whole bunch of muffins, she brought them over, she stayed for a short while, and then she left. I feel strongly about that issue right now. I feel that so many people tend to use words, not actions. That if we were all like Cher, we wouldn't be asking, "What can we do?" Instead, we'd be doing something for our friends, our relatives, or even that stranger that we may never meet again. When you feel strongly about an issue, you need to write about it as quickly as you can. Right at the top of my agenda is an article that I want to write about. I don't know the headline for this article, but I know that it covers 3 points. And the 3 points are that we shouldn't be asking, "What should I do?" but we should be doing something instead. We should not wait to tell someone how they changed our lives, but be specific about how they did it. And the third thing is about how to avoid grumbling and demonstrate persistence and be a source of inspiration instead. So this is the article that I feel very strongly about. I have to outline it. I have to sit there and get the article out. I have to let this article live, breathe, before it just gasps and dies. We all feel strongly about issues. We may have just run into a problem, and that issue is top of mind. Or we might have been a recipient of a great wave of generosity. But you don't need to be prodded by happy and sad moments. You could have just heard a podcast, and that could have ignited a fire within you. Or in the case of this article, this podcast, someone may have asked you a question, like a client asked me this question in 5000 BC, and I felt that I had to answer it in detail. I could have answered it in probably 50 words, but I chose to write 4,000 words about it. There are lots of things that rev up the engines of your brain, and the more strongly you feel about these issues right now, the more likely you are to write with a greater amount of enthusiasm. Yet, doesn't this feeling lead directly to the outlining process? Yes, it does. That feeling comes right before the outline. Once you feel the surge, you then get down to the outline. However, in many cases, a surge may break the rule of outlining. Take, for instance, when you see something on Facebook or when you see something in a forum. There's a discussion going and you need to get an important point across. In such a scenario, outlining may slow down the process. It slows down that moment of passion. Instead, what you've got to do is you've got to capture that enthusiasm while it's still fresh. What you tend to write in that moment may be remarkably more lucid than anything that's outlined and planned. But before you go answering everything like you're answering it on Facebook, remember that writing when the iron is hot is not that excuse. It's not an excuse to avoid the outlining process. Outlining is smart because it saves time. Writing an answer quickly is just a way of getting your thoughts out quickly and keeping that fire alive. It's a shoddy excuse if you just want to avoid outlining. yet it does feed the flames of your outline. I tend to write very quickly if needed, but then I will create an outline and then I will fit the information into that outline. Later, probably the day after, I will write the article or the chapter in the book. Enthusiasm doesn't always come quickly, yet it does strike from time to time, and if you don't go through the process of writing down your thoughts and fashioning them, your writing won't necessarily be dull. A lot of writing comes from just sitting down and working, plodding through a project. Yet the sparkle comes from frustration, it comes from desperation, it comes from inspiration, and it comes and goes in quick bursts. When you learn to capture those shiny bits in your article, that is what a great writer does. All of this writing and outlining and striking when the iron is hot, this is about structure. It's about discipline. Yet enthusiasm often shows up when you least expect it. It's at this point that we need to learn to trust that diversion. Let's find out how deviating from the script is a good idea to create a high level of enthusiasm. So we've finished this whole factor of outlining, which you've heard of before, but now it's about fresh outlining. And then we went on to this factor of enthusiasm. But now we're going down a diversion. We don't know where we're going. And this is also a very critical point. At times, your writing needs to get messy. You need to deviate from your script. Let's find out what messy is all about. When does a concept become a coconut? When you run into your computer's autocorrect, that's when. The other day I was writing an article in the forum 5000 BC, and I fully intended to use the word concept. But as you do, my fingers went on their own journey, and as I typed something that was clearly garbled, the autocorrect suggested coconut as a replacement. Now, this is the messiness, the unexpected factor that leads to enthusiasm. It's not unlike the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr. In the book Messy, author Tim Harford talks about how Martin Luther King Jr. valued preparation. By the age of 5, he was learning Bible passages by heart. And then by 14, he won a public speaking contest. And how he went about it? He went about it researching and outlining and re-outlining. And of course, practicing. Endless amounts of practice. In fact, all that practice came to a fore when he started preaching. So he was given a job as a minister, and every sermon would start off with this yellow-lined paper. So he would start on Tuesday, and he would research, and then he would redraft that speech that was going to give on Sunday, and he would redraft it many times. He lavished well over 15 hours of just preparation, and then he learned the sermon by heart, just so that he never had to refer to his notes. Yet the one speech that was the most memorable of all wasn't rehearsed. It was an improvisation. He did stick to his prepared text for most of the speech, and then as he came to the end, he started to improvise. At that moment, Mahalia Jackson shouted, "Tell them about the dream, Martin!" And then he was off, giving one of the most memorable speeches that seemed to take a life of its own. In the world of script writing, it is known that scripts take a life of their own. Often, writers are astounded to find that the character in the script is starting to dictate the series of events. Just like autocorrect on your computer, the character decides what you have to do next, what you have to write next. This concept of the character taking over sounds really odd until you speak to writers who express how the words on the page seem to come alive in a way that is very hard to imagine, very hard to describe. To create enthusiasm in your writing, you need to follow that diversion. The outline is crucial. There's not a shred of doubt about that fact. Every writer has to outline and re-outline, and that outline keeps you within parameters. But the outline can also be the launching pad for enthusiasm on a monumental scale. Suddenly the words are flowing out of you in a way that you cannot imagine. The result is something that you are not anticipating. And yet it's extremely pleasing when you get to the finish point. Martin Luther King Jr. was no average speaker. Writers, singers, jazz players, sports people, they're not rank amateurs. They've got quite a bit of practice under their belt, and it's only at that point that the improvisation kicks in. Which isn't to say that you should wait until you're a great writer. No one is a great writer. Everyone is still learning their craft, and the best way to get started is to go down this path of improvisation. To simply say yes when that improv is calling you. The enthusiasm that you feel for any subject matter will present itself in a way that you don't or you cannot expect. Even in the early stages of your writing, you should break free. Let the text take over. Unburdened by typos and grammatical errors, let it just go wild. You want to write in the same manner as a cartoonist doodles. There is this freedom to just go somewhere. You don't know where that somewhere is, but you're going anyway, just like a doodle. I had to learn these lessons of breaking free as well. Take, for instance, the script of this podcast. When I started doing this podcast back in late 2014, I had a very rough outline. I had no script. I'd stick to the points, but all of the thoughts had to be improvised as I went along. By mid-2015, I had not only outlined the podcast in great detail, but started reading it off the computer screen and then finally off a teleprompter. Now, I use a teleprompter on my iPhone, and it's called Prompt Smart. If you do any kind of teleprompting, Prompt Smart is the way to go. So I thought I was doing a great job. And then someone suggested I could do better. That comment via email got me thinking about what I'd learned about the diversion and how letting go was actually a smart strategy. And so that's what I did. I still have the outline. I still have the script. I still follow the script. But from time to time in the podcast, I'll take a diversion and I'll let that diversion take over. So I'll start to ad-lib in the middle of this podcast, and then I'm going down this side road, and then eventually I'll come back to the script, back to the main road. It's very odd, this advice. It's almost contrary to what you think should be done. And yet we know it to be true. To get enthusiasm, you have to doodle. You have to do some good, fine work, and then you have to go back to doodling again. It's what makes for great work. It brings immense power to your words. And that is how you bring enthusiasm into your writing. So this brings us to the end of this podcast, and let's summarize and then find out the one thing that we can do today. So what did we cover in this podcast? The first thing that we covered was the factor of the freshness of the outline. So it's not just the outline, but the outline has to be fresh. The moment the outline gets to be a week old, 2 weeks old, it's very hard. It almost gets crusty. That's the way to describe it. It gets crusty. It's so much harder to work with that outline. So whenever the outline is fresh, that's when you need to start working on it. Just like Martin Luther King was working on it. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Sunday, we're going to use it as the sermon. And that's how I tend to write. I tend to start on one day and then go next day and then elaborate it and then tweak it. And then finally it's out there. But it's still fresh. It's not very old. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you need to feel very strongly about that issue. Right now, you need to feel strongly about it. Maybe it's something you heard on a podcast. Maybe it's something in an audiobook. Maybe it's something you just read. Often that's what I'll do. I'll read an article, like maybe this Martin Luther King story. I read about it a little while ago and then I put it in. Today, I was writing an article and it was about Tesla. Now, I was speaking to someone who works for Tesla here and he was explaining the size of the battery. That went into the article. You haven't listened to the article yet. It's not on a podcast, but it will be. And what I'm doing is, as soon as I get that information, as soon as I get that inspiration, bingo, it goes into the article. And that's what you need to do. You need to make sure that it's fresh. You need to feel that energy. You need to feel the strength of that frustration, that happiness, that joy, whatever it is, and then put it down on paper. I mean, it's the same thing whether you're drawing cartoons or composing music or doing just about anything. It's the same concept. That energy needs to go into your work while you still feel very strongly about it. And the third thing is that you need all of this scripting, but then from time to time, you just deviate from the script. You let the script take over, let the words take over, let the ideas take over. Whether you're writing for a podcast, whether you're writing an article, whatever you're doing, at some point, there is a diversion. And our natural tendency is like, no, we have to stay here. No, go down that diversion. At some point, you will find that it's interesting and eventually it will come back to the main road. You're skilled enough to pull it back. And if you're not, then over time you will get skilled enough to pull it back. Trust that diversion, trust that bumpy road. And what you'll find is that there is this enthusiasm that you wouldn't have expected and you can't anticipate, you can't predict. And it makes the whole thing messy, but your work will be so much better. So what's the one thing that you can do today? The one thing that you can do today is you're reading something, you're listening to something. Maybe you're listening to this podcast and maybe you've got an idea from it. Go out and write an article. Maybe it's very similar to this topic, but write an article. As the phrase goes, strike while the iron is hot. So whether you're reading a book, listening to a podcast, watching a movie, whatever it is, that's what I tend to do. I'll watch something on, say, tectonics, or I'll watch something about volcanoes or clouds or anything. And then I'll go, okay, I have to put this in the article. And I'll start from there. And that's what brings the whole enthusiasm factor. That's what makes these podcasts so interesting. All of those stories, all of those little anecdotes, all of that stuff comes from the freshness and the enthusiasm from having read it or listened to it just that day. Something I've heard 3 months ago, it could be interesting, but often it just falls flat. So strike while the iron is hot. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. What's happening in Psychotactics land? The first thing on the agenda is the home study of the article writing course. Many of you have been very patiently waiting for it, and rightly so, because only 35 copies of the home study of the article writing course will be available on the 18th of September. So make sure that you have that date marked, because 35 copies go very quickly. The reason why it goes quickly is because we promise skill. We don't promise more information. So a lot of products out there, a lot of courses out there, they promise, well, I don't know what they promise, but they don't promise skill, and we promise skill. And this one is a home study, and like all of the home study versions, it is guaranteed, but it's also guaranteed to bring you skill. There is nothing more frustrating than trying to write an article. Believe me, I tried it when I first started out. It would drive me completely crazy. To have this structure in place means that you're able to turn out an article in 90 minutes or less, and to have it like a magazine quality article. That's very important. Both of those elements are very important, because there's no point in taking a week or 2 weeks to write an article, or even a day to write an article, when you can do it in 90 minutes. You can create great stuff consistently, and that's what the article writing course home study is about. So 18th September, put it in your calendar. When I have something important, I just put it in my phone so it reminds me on the date and the time, and then it's done because it shows up on the day itself. And maybe that's what you should do. I'm also writing a book on how to get an idea and probably how to start up a business. It's one of those questions that shows up in my inbox almost every day. So it's time to answer that question because a lot of you want to know how to go about that exercise. On the 18th of October, you'll be able to buy into that process. So that's the pre-sale. We'll pre-sell it on the 18th of October. On the 25th of November, that book, that series will be available. Finally, if you're listening to this and you're wondering, should I join 5000 BC? Do I have to have a business to get going? Do I have to have an idea? Well, the thing about 5000 BC is that there is no such thing as a perfect idea. You look at all the businesses out there. You look at Airbnb. You look at Uber. All of them had to go through a process where they started out, they had an idea. The idea had to be trashed. It had to be reformatted in some way. It had to be improved. And finally gets off the ground. And that's what 5000 BC does really well. What we're doing is we're not going and saying, hey, your idea is already amazing or your idea is hopeless. All ideas are hopeless to begin with. They're all like, uncooked. And what 5000 BC helps you to do is to access the information that already exists. All membership sites have information. It's not just 5000 BC. All membership sites have information. What 5000 BC does have is that we walk through the idea. We talk through it. We ask you questions. You answer. And the idea starts to build from there and grow from there. And to me, that's really important. To get people like you who are probably introverts, who want that safe space, who don't want to be ridiculed every time they put up a question. Your questions will be answered in great detail and consistently, and that's what makes 5000 BC so cool. So if you have an idea, you have an existing business, well, you're going to have lots of projects. You may want to start up webinars, podcasts, write stuff. There are so many things that a modern business has to do and has to do quite well. And you can get advice on all of that. You can get information on all of that. But equally, if you're just starting out a business or even pre-starting a business and trying to work out how to go through everything, then 5000 BC is very cool for you. So let's see you in 5000 BC. Join the introverts, join the safe space, and ask your questions. And I think you'll really feel very comfortable there. That's the whole point. It's a be kind, be helpful, or be gone. That's our phrase. And it's not just a phrase. You'll find out for yourself. So let's meet you in 5000 BC. And that's me, Sean D'Souza, saying bye for now. Bye-bye. Still listening? This morning I got a card from Tony Planasek. And Tony is one of our clients, and she's been on the headline course, I think, and the first 50 words course, or maybe it was the articles writing course. I'm not really sure. But she's been on a couple of courses, and she sent a little card. The story behind the card is that she was going to send this card, and somewhere along the way, the card dropped out of her bag and probably onto the pavement. We don't know where it got lost. But some kind stranger picked it up and mailed the card to us. Now, I don't know whether they put a stamp on it as well. That kind of detail I didn't get. But interestingly, Tony decided, well, she's lost that card. She's going to send a second card. So now we have 2 cards from Tony. In fact, today we got a chocolate and 2 cards. And this is probably one of the things that we really enjoy. It's one thing to get a client to pay you because, when you're buying a product or a service at Psychotactics, you're paying for it. But to get cards, to get chocolates, that kind of acknowledgement from the client is way more than money, way more than someone just buying your product or service. It talks about the fact that we enjoy being with our customers. And that's what we did on our trip. That's what we did when we went to Sweden. That's what we did when we went to Amsterdam and Singapore. We met with everybody. We had a great time. We had lunch. We know a lot of the clients. We've had lots of lunches and dinners, and we've traveled with some of our clients, and it's just been a majorly rewarding experience. And I hope that someday you can have this experience as well. When you start up your business and you run into clients and then they become your friends. Some of our best friends are our clients. I just wanted to say thank you for all of you that send the cards, the postcards, and yes, the chocolates. So far, no wine has shown up, but I'll keep my options open. That's me, Sean D'Souza, saying bye for now. Bye-bye.